All right, we can get going. My name is Jeff Roberts. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition and President of the NFOIC Board. And this session is going to be talking about citizens documenting public meetings. We all know what has happened with newsrooms, news organizations over the past several decades. The fact that we just have way fewer journalists than we used to have to cover public meetings. We never had enough to do that, and even when journalism was more robust, but now there are a lot of places, a lot of public meetings that are not served by reporters. And what do you do about that? So one answer to that question is to train and pay people who are not traditional professional journalists to cover public meetings and get that information disseminated to public somehow, either through journalists who can use that information or in other ways. And so we have a panel today that's going to talk about, we're going to have a discussion about documenters and organizations like documenters and where that concept comes from, what's the latest with that concept, where it's going. It definitely is growing as a solution, at least one solution to the fact that a lot of meetings don't get covered, a lot of government meetings, and there's not one way to do this either. So we'll talk about that as well. So we have a really good panel to talk about what's in place now and what some of the experiments have been to bring this about. So I'm going to first pass it along for him to introduce himself. Max Resnik.
Hey, thanks so much for having me here. My name is Max Resnik. I'm the Director of Network Services for the Documenters Network at City Bureau. I'm calling in from sunny New York City today and can't wait to talk with you all about this participatory civic media movement that we're building.
And now we also have Melanie Plenda.
Hi, I'm Melanie Plenda. I'm the Executive Director of the Granite State News Collaborative in New Hampshire. We're a collective of 20 local news outlets who work along with community organizations and educational organizations to essentially, we've agreed to work together to get more news to more people across the state. And I'm happy to be
here. And January Jones.
Hi, I'm January Jones. Hello from Denver. I just like to say this is the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. My family is also from here from a long time ago, so I feel very obligated to acknowledge that when we do anything from Denver, and we don't take credit for how cool Denver is. But it's also the home of Jeff's organization, and that's how I came into this fold. I'm a consultant and a journalist. I've been doing citizen journalism projects since 2009, and I'm a fanatic about government transparency and media by the people.
So 50% of us are Coloradans, but we're going to talk about a lot more than just Colorado in this panel today. When you guys have questions, I know we're in the Zoom, but you can put them in the Whova chat, and Denise is going to get those questions over to us. Feel free to ask questions while we're talking. This is going to be more of a conversation than a presentation. And we'll also have some resources towards the end that we can direct you to as well. So I'm going to go back to Max. Documenters is kind of the name that everybody knows, I think, now in this area. It's almost in some ways it's becoming like a franchise. But I'd like Max to talk about when did documenters start? What was the original concept, and a bit of what is it evolving into?
Sure. So documentaries started in Chicago with a very simple idea. Local public meetings are happening every single day across the city of Chicago, in counties across the country, and there are not enough local reporters to be at all of these meetings. And local residents who should be able to attend and understand these events often are not able to. They're held during working hours. They're held at in places that are inaccessible, and we, along with now our growing network of partner sites across the country, train and pay local residents to attend these meetings, take notes about what's going on, practice journalism skills, but really learn about how civics work.
Okay. And January, you recently led a project in Colorado, specifically Larimer County, Colorado, where Fort Collins is, that was really in conjunction with the League of Women Voters, which already had already has a citizen observers program. What was the idea there, and tell us a little bit about what you learned.
So the idea of citizens sharing information and going to public meetings is old, right? We have a lot of modern tools these days to get our information out. But the old school method is you go to the meeting, you take some notes, maybe on paper, right? And then you share out significant things that happened. And so through various partnerships, they came up with a project here in Colorado last year, and they decided that the League of Women Voters was the applicant of Larimer County. And the League of Women Voters has had, of course, the long-standing 100-year history of being engaged with voters and voter information, but they also lobby. So that's the caveat. When you partner with citizen journalism and other organizations, there's always a caveat, right? And so we talk about in newsrooms building a wall between journalism and funding, right? Well, sometimes with these organizations too, you have very engaged people like the League of Women Voters, their local areas, but you got to build a little bit of a wall, right? So people trust your information. And so I was contracted by the League of Women Voters of Larimer County to try a project, and I relied on Max immensely. The Documentaries program has an amazing culture, a community of practice, standards, and such a great way to really meet people where they're at and have them engage in their own communities about the things that affect them the most. That really vibed with what the League of Women Voters does. And they had this observer program, for 15 years or more, but they were going to meetings and they were reporting just kind of internally so they could inform their other members. The idea of this project was to take it bigger. And so we bootstrapped something. Max let me rip off so many things from documenters. The observers program was very analog, let's say. And so what we did is we put together kind of a mix of documenters and observers looking at best practices. But the goal was really to get this information to people about what's going on in their local meetings. And I think the innovation in our project, which was called the Citizens Observers Pilot Project, Colorado Citizens Observers Pilot Project, was that I needed video. I needed the record of the meeting. And so what the community part and teaching people about how to understand meetings is complicated, but you can do it. But getting the record in the first place is where, for me, it all starts, because what I found through this project is the public record has lots of holes in it. And so what we worked really hard to do in my project was leverage video, AI tools, and all the technology workflows so people could attend and report on meetings remotely, but also that it is more accessible, right? Because we did this in a rural county. It's really big geographically. 10 different jurisdictions plus interjurisdictional areas. And so access to showing up at your local city council, you know, that could be 30 minutes away on a dark, icy night, right? And so we really tried to leverage all these technology tools. And what Documentaries does so well is the community part of it, right? Teaching people, saying you deserve to be here. We're gonna invest in you to learn these things and pay people, right? Because the League of Women Voters has always been volunteers. And so I think the big shift here for our project that was different was getting in the audio visual record. So you knew whenever somebody took notes from that meeting, you could look it up. We got the audio visual, we got a transcript, you know, to verify our notes, because there's a lot of mistrust with citizen journalism. Where are they coming from? People have agendas, and I will say in Colorado, it's very polarized. People are fanatical about some things, you know. Fortunately, at the local level, it tends to be toned down, right? But so that's what we did. We kind of took documenters and the citizen observers from League of Women Voters, added video, so you would have a verifiable record. So if you don't trust our notes, because we didn't have any reputation starting this project necessarily, especially with journalists. And so giving the record so you could look up to see if you believed what we said was a super important part of our project.
Thank you. I want to come back to those, some of those things you talked about with tools like video and AI, and also the trust issue. But let's hear a little bit from Melanie about New Hampshire and what you're getting going there.
Sure. So we actually we're already a pretty tight-knit collaborative of 20 outlets. So we had outlets already working with us. And as my job as executive director, I try to find out what is it that all the partners need, what are they missing, and then how can we help get that to them. And the thing they said to me time and time again is what everyone's saying here: we need people to cover meetings. It's great you're doing these big projects, but this is actually what we need. So I knew about documenters, and I also knew about a project in Vermont where they use students to do community journalism. So that's kind of where we started in our first iteration. We work really closely with a local school, a nonprofit called the Necky Loeb School of Journalism, of Communications, and they already do sort of all different kinds of journalism classes meant for community members and ongoing education and things like that. So she was already set up to sort of do things either in person or remotely, and her name is Laura Simone. She was super excited and a great partner. So we were able to kind of stand this up pretty quickly, but we also pulled in the gentleman from UVM that put that project together, and we worked really closely with one of our university partners at Franklin Pierce, who developed the initial curriculum. So with that, we sort of started bringing in community members to do more community journalism. But again, it wasn't really hitting that mark of we really want meetings, and we really want people who want to go to those meetings. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons we learned first, like have people who actually want to go to the meetings. It's wonderful that there's people who want to cover features and other news about town. We need that, but we really, really need these meetings covered. So we tweaked our projects a little bit, and now over the summer, we started working with the New England First Amendment Coalition, because they have these amazing resources already put together on right to know law, on Open Meetings Acts. So we took a little of them, and we took a little documenters, and we took a little Necky Loeb and a little UVM. We mixed it all up. But the most crucial thing that we did was we pulled in two of our media partners from the beginning. And we had them look over the curriculum, tell us what you need, what is going to be helpful, how can the documenters be of most service to you, how can we work this? And we kept them in the loop the entire time. And I can't tell you how important that was because, one, I mean, just very practically speaking, editors are very busy, and you might mention something to them once, and then 6 months later you say, hey, we put together this thing for you, and they don't even know what you're talking about, and now they don't want to be part of it anymore because they said yes in a fit of whatever. Like, yeah, just stop emailing me. So having them along the way and having them tweak the curriculum, have say in the curriculum. They also, as part of our project, so we picked their 2 regions which overlap. So in total, they cover about 70 different communities between these 2 papers. So we figured where there's overlap, that's going to be the most, we're going to have the most coverage of people if we bring folks in, and we're going to be able to help all these different communities. Plus, they're 2 really established newspapers in the area. They're well trusted, well respected. So we also had them in our project. We wanted to make sure to kind of speak to what January was talking about. I mean, we have a lot of involved folks who are also very partisan or may have an agenda. So we wanted to make sure that we were getting folks who just really wanted to be there and cover meetings and didn't have their own personal agenda. So we did an application process. And that was another place where we had the editors decide, okay, and also because the editors know who, like, the really good gadflies are, because they go to every meeting and they know all the stuff, and they're genuinely involved, and if they're applying, that's great. Like, we want them, you know, so they know who all the players are. So they helped pick the class. We started the class at the beginning, like the middle of September. The class consisted of 6 workshops of an hour and a half each. And there was homework. That's the second thing that we learned. We went a little hard on the homework. We maybe want to draw that back next time. We were real enthusiastic with that homework. But we had locals who were able to teach the classes, and we had videos. We were also available to answer questions in between. Now we're wrapping up the workshops. We have this class tonight, actually, and then one more where they actually get to meet with our editors. And they get to have their first editorial meeting, and we're hoping that's going to be in person. And then they're off. And how we do the pay structure is we do small stipends. So we pay for each documenter to go to 2 meetings a month for up to 6 months, and we cover about 10 documenters, 6 to 10 documenters, and that's funded through grant funding. And then after the 6 months, then the outlets, if it's working for them, agree to take on that cost, and then they'll carry that on. And we already secured funding for our next cohort, which is going to be in the Lakes region in New Hampshire, which is great. And we also have some funding to do another one in Nashua, New Hampshire. And I'm particularly excited about Nashua because it is our 2nd largest city. It's our 2nd most diverse city. They have 1 newspaper that has 1 reporter, and to cover like I think they have like 70 or 80,000 people and all these surrounding communities. All this news happens there. 1 reporter, and it's crazy. So if we can help, that would be great. And then all of our stories get shared out with our entire network. So that's especially important as we broaden out into, the Lakes region. There's like 3 or 4 papers that kind of cover that same area. Nashua, all of our statewides are interested in Nashua news, which is great. So we kind of have a multiplier effect going on, which is awesome.
Max, can you take us back to the basics of how documenters works? And I know it works differently in some different places because you're operating in several cities now, but what's the basic concept? How is the information collected and then disseminated to news organizations or documenters' sort of own outlets?
Sure. So every documenter's site has 1 to 1.5 minimum FTE full-time roles working with documenters. They serve as a combination of a program manager, community builder, editorial support bridge role between the home base organization that runs the local site and all of the other newsrooms and civic organizations in those communities. So documenters at the network level, we've built a website, documenters.org, and we build scrapers, bits of Python code that go to local government websites, pull in meeting times, dates, agendas, minutes, when they're available, and allow local teams to then decide, in an average week, there's going to be, 7 different assignments that we're going to send out documentaries to be covering. We'll cover this week our school board in these 2 neighborhoods. We'll cover our city council. We'll cover our budget subcommittee. Documenters are paid somewhere between $15 and $23 an hour to attend and document those meetings. And it's designed so that, if somebody is super enthusiastic and wants to apply every week, that's great. But if you only want to apply, once every 6 months or once a year, but still show up to local events, that's also fine. It's intended to be, like January was mentioning, a community of practice. It's a space for people who otherwise would not necessarily know that they could even go to local public meetings, to have that supportive place to be able to talk through weird things that they noticed, or to geek out about local transit or local streets or schools, for example. So in a city like Detroit, for example, which was our next site after Chicago, Outlier Media is the home base organization for Detroit documenters. And they also work with the Detroit Free Press, with WDET, and with other news organizations and civic organizations. Documenters reporting is made available through Creative Commons. So any organization that wants to be able to pull in information or follow up on a specific story idea is welcome to, as long as they credit the work of the documenters. And rather than, documenting every single word that's spoken at the meeting, it's not like a person as an otter transcript. These documenters are bringing their own experiences as residents into their work. What is something that stood out to you? What is something that you're curious about that you want to follow up on? What is something that just didn't make sense based on your experience living in this community for such a long time? And that is a way to build those questions, recognize the documenter as a person and not just as somebody who's completing a task. And there's space there to build trust and relationships of trust between the documenters and the local news organizations through those acts.
And how does the information itself actually get to the news organization? And then how does the news organization, kind of going back to some of the things that January is talking about, know that they can trust this information?
Sure. So most of our sites are nonprofit newsrooms. So Documenters is part of the editorial team within those shops. And every week at editorial meetings, the Documenters site staff will work with those reporters to say, hey, these are the meetings that we're covering this week. This is what we heard last week. These are some of the stories that, might make sense for a housing beat reporter or for an education beat reporter if you're in a news ecosystem that is staffed up. In other places, meeting briefs, kind of the short and sweet TLDRs. These are the 2 or 3 essential things you need to know as a resident from this meeting this week, have driven lots of traffic to our local partners. So for organizations that are wondering, do people actually care about these meetings? The answer is yes. And the things that folks are looking for are, if I'm a local resident and I can't go to these meetings, spend, 3 or 4 hours a week learning about local politics in real time, knowing that I have a short and sweet summary that highlights, what are the things that I absolutely need to know, and what are the opportunities for me to get involved down the line. Those are the things that people are looking for most often. The question about trust is a great one. So documenters, in their work are taking note of, not only the meeting proceedings, but they're gathering additional documentation. They're bringing in reports that, here's a great example. In Cleveland a couple of months ago, in the official meeting minutes for one of the subcommittees, they, in the minutes that were listed, it said a presentation was given, and that was it. We had no links or information about who gave the presentation, whether there was any discussion. Documenters will go through, grab screenshots of that presentation, they'll take photos, they'll note any sort of discussion or deliberation, And it's a much more comprehensive rundown of what actually was going on in those meetings than what otherwise would be available. In many of our sites also, documenters are recording the full meeting proceedings as well, so that if there is a point where a documenter might have misheard a set of numbers, for example, or if a local reporter wants to follow up on a specific story lead, they'll have access to that full recording as well. And in many of our cities and towns, this documenter reporting is the only record of these meetings that happens. We can't, like, even in cities as large as Atlanta, there are, boards and commissions that should be making their information public and don't. And because documenters are there, there's a record of what's going on.
Are you finding that they're going in most of these cities not to the city council meeting or the county commission meeting or sort of the school board, but sort of the smaller public bodies that people tend not to think about, but maybe important things happen at?
Yeah, we see a combination of both. Usually when a news site launches, we recommend doing a broad overview of all of the local public meetings that you can find. That's an opportunity for documenters to get some familiarity with some of the more well-run, well-structured public bodies, and also start to dip a toe into seeing, where are places where nobody expects anyone from the public to ever be there. When our Cleveland site launched, some of the city councilors were like, who are these watchers who are attending these boards and subcommittees? Like, who are they? And now when they see documenters in the room, they'll pause and say, okay, I recognize that there's a documenter here. Let me take a little bit of extra time to explain what this means, because I know that documenter and the newsroom is going to be sending this out in the form of explainers, in the form of newsletters, social media graphics. We, in each of our sites, build different news products based on the needs of local communities. So in areas, where there's low literacy rates, creating podcasts, video explainers, more graphical representations of what's going on at these meetings, not expecting that everybody will be able to read a full set of meeting notes or regularly subscribe to a newsletter, for example.
And in January in Larimer County, you found there are a lot of sort of undercovered boards, commissions, things like that people generally weren't getting to. Some of them weren't even recording their meetings at all.
Yeah, so I think this is pretty common in most communities. So typically so Larimer County is a mix of rural. Fort Collins is a big town there, considerably, because there's a college there. But the rest is very spread out, and there's 10 different jurisdictions, small towns. But overall, I did an audit and I looked at maybe 107 different meetings per month that were happening interjurisdictional for all these. And in any community, it's typically just the town council and the planning commission that actually record and share their meetings via video. Everybody else releases minutes, but there's no rule about how soon minutes have to get out, right? And no rule about how complete they need to be. It is not a transcript of the meeting, right? And so, so many of these boards and commissions are citizen-based, and they're with people who are giving all their free time and are so passionate about this, right? But there's not mechanisms at local government to just take a couple more steps and make that video accessible. So what I found in auditing these, and we made a chart and everything from the data, but of the 107 meetings, 57% could be joined via Zoom, but only less than 5% are recorded and posted to share later, right? And so I think there's a really easy bridge here, and I think part of the citizen journalism project is to open a dialogue with your local government to be more transparent. It's not like they don't want to be necessarily. They may not have the tools, or it's like one secretary working for multiple different boards, and but I think that there's a really great opportunity once we start auditing these meetings and showing up to these meetings. I mean, COVID was a boon for remote meeting access. The issue is no one's taken the second third step to record and just post it to YouTube. And so in our project, I live ripped Zoom meetings. I set my OtterBot, my AI meeting joiners to go to these meetings and record the audio and take screenshots, you know. So the accessibility is there. There's just a very, there's a very big opportunity to help local governments be more transparent and kind of skip some steps for us documenters, right? Because do we need to have a whole video workflow? And I've had people say, you know, well, the government should be doing that. They should be putting all these up. And what I say is that, hey, nonprofits always step in to the gaps that government isn't doing. And Freedom of Information coalitions and journalists, we step into the gaps, right? And so if they can get better, let's help them.
Melanie, you said something interesting about making sure, as you're starting this, that you spend some time with the news organizations to know really what they want and what they need, because they are so busy and distracted by 100 million things that you need to really make this easy for them. And I think in Colorado, you know, we had this pilot with the League of Women Voters, and tried to get news organizations interested in the content that would be generated by this. But it was hard. And I don't know if it was because there was a civic organization involved, or if it's that they were just so busy that they didn't have time to even think about it. But could you all talk about, how you do that? How do you get the news organizations to pay attention to this, to see value in this, and why that's so important to even do up front?
Yeah, and I mean, it definitely did not hurt that all of the partners have been working together and with the GSNC as an organization for the past 4 years. So we all know each other. Also doesn't hurt that I worked for most of them when I was a reporter. But I think in this case, I really think it was about anticipating from their perspective, one, what is going to make more work for me? You know what I mean? So those are the things that are going to be the roadblocks. Those are going to be the things that are the line between yes, I'll do this, and no, I won't. So if it's, I can pull together a Google folder that everyone shares, that the documenters are going to upload everything on, and every time there's something in there, the editors, I'm sending a link to them. I'm making all of that as easy as possible. So then they can just pull it and use it. You know what I mean? So thinking through just down to the logistics of what would make this an easy process. I really think that having the application process made them feel better, because I think that they felt then like not only did they have ownership in the project because they had a real big hand in who was going to get to participate, but it gives them that added level of, because most local news editors and reporters know their communities. They know who the players are. They know who's most likely to to put in for something like this. And I think the fact that they were able to kind of kick the tires on the applicants, and really, I mean, they just read the applications. It wasn't like they grilled them or anything in interview process, but that gave an extra level of comfort. Also, I think because the documenters are not writing the actual stories, they're bringing the notes to them. And so if there's the reporters and the editors then can use their own judgment. They can ask the documenter follow-up questions. They can do all that stuff, and then follow up on that story. And from the editors that I'm working with, that's kind of the biggest thing, because they said to me, honestly, it's not even so much that we're missing the meetings, we're missing the issues that are coming up at these meetings that we need to be following up on, that we need to be looking more deeply into. So for them, that is the value, that it's like, these are people who are, because honestly, what reporter even, they can't go to the meeting and likely don't have time to even watch a video if it's available. Like in our communities, a lot of them have a lot of the videos, but they don't even have time to do that. So if this is a way to put it right in front of them, it gives them all the essentials that they need to know. They can then use their news judgment to do what they want. So I think that's a real value. And honestly, I think they're looking for a solution that works. I will say one more thing. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but one more thing. I do think that they loved the idea because we really firmly believed this as we were putting this together, that even if these folks who took the class, even if like 9 of them ended up not participating, that's 9 more people who know how to access their government. And they really genuinely loved that idea of putting that education out into the community. And I find that with local news outlets, for sure, like that's their home. That's where they are part of that community and they care about that. So I think that was another selling point for them too.
We always recommend, all of our colleagues think about what power they hold and what they can share with residents. We, have access to local politicians, and residents don't always. So how can we use opportunities like documentaries to make sure that people feel comfortable with local government and know that that power is theirs as well?
I just want to make a point that Melanie said is that we are giving citizen reports on a government meeting. This is what happened. These are the people that talked. This is not journalism. This is not a published story in a news publication. My goal with our project was to put everything on one page. So a journalist could say, okay, here's the notes from our documenter. Here is the video. Here is a searchable transcript in Otter. Here's shortcuts to time-stamped issues during that meeting. So they can keyword search a video and say, I can verify what that person said in their notes. My goal was to be like, here's this meeting, here's all this information. You as a journalist, could you make a story in 45 minutes from reading through this, right? And so that accessibility is key, putting everything together, which the governments aren't doing, when they publish their meetings. But we have to really emphasize, these are reports about meetings. These are not stories. This is not journalism.
Max, what have you found makes a good documenter besides enthusiasm, which I think is probably one of the things that they absolutely need?
Yeah, enthusiasm, a willingness to learn, curiosity about their local community. I think the skills that documenters bring outside of their role as documenters, if you're a parent or as a teacher or somebody who had a career in some field and are able to bring that to the community, that willingness to participate and share what you know with others locally and contribute is what makes it, when documenters see their work as something that they are owning, right? It's not just something where a news organization is saying, hey, go to this meeting and cover this. It's like, I am a member of this community and I have skills, experiences that I can contribute. And I want to organize my own, working group, or I want to pitch a special project. We had documenters in Detroit who, after attending local transit meetings, had been hearing that bus wait times were down. And they said, this doesn't really track with our experience commuting. Let's put together a Documenters on the Bus project, where we spend, a couple of weeks going around talking with commuters, with bus drivers, build our own data set and contribute that to the conversation that's happening locally about public transportation. And the documenters who start projects like that are like, we love when people, here's the thing, we love when people don't take any assignments and just show up for a training and just show up for the community of practice. And we love when documenters pitch their own project ideas. Like that whole range of experiences is what Documenters is designed around.
Two-part question. Why is it important to pay documenters, and where does the money come from to do this?
Yeah, so most people, when they're thinking about when public meetings are held, they're, in most cities, they're during working hours, they're during the day, or if they're in the evening, they're at times when, if you're a parent, for example, you would need to cover childcare. we see this work as work, and we want to be equitable in how we're paying people for their time. Documenters is a civic side hustle. It's not a full-time job. It's not a part-time gig. It's just something that people can, take assignments when they're able to. But, if it does make a material difference in somebody's ability to, buy groceries for a month or pay their phone bill, that's a huge win for us. And we want people to see this as something that is not exclusive to people who have the time and the ability to volunteer, but is something that really recognizes people where they're at. So far, we, in most of our sites, will raise funds locally from community foundations, from family foundations, and increasingly documenters for hire. So, if there's a conference, for example, and documenters can be brought in to take notes at that conference, that's a skill that translates beyond just public meetings, but is useful for other types of convenings and gatherings. We've had documenters be subcontracted to take notes, do what they do regularly at different city events. They're, parlaying their work and experience into paid opportunities that can then support future documenters' assignments down the line as well. And in, news collaboratives and cooperatives like the one that Melanie's working on, if there are organizations that are all benefiting from that work, if each kicks in, a couple $1,000s, for example, it allows for more assignments to be available and for more folks to be able to benefit from that work. We've also had organizations underwrite and sponsor specific areas. So, we're going to cover all of the school board meetings in our county for the year, and it's going to be underwritten or sponsored by this organization. With that comes, importance of transparency. We need to, make sure that people understand who's funding that, and make sure also that there's no concern about editorial influence by that funding. All of our doc sites, if they are not members of the Institute for Nonprofit News, INN, abide by those rules and make sure that all of their funding is transparent for the work.
Melanie, are you writing grants to fund this, or are the news organizations kicking in money?
Our news organizations don't contribute financially to the collaborative or our projects. They contribute in time, though. Just to throw that out there. So it's not for nothing, but they just don't contribute cash to the effort. But yeah, I wrote a couple of grants, and this I think is actually really interesting. I wrote grants to places that normally, I write a lot of grants in my position at the collaborative. We're a nonprofit. Sometimes the collaborative's a hard sell because it's a new concept. This was real easy. And people who would not have normally funded the collaborative funded a project like this, and they immediately got it. And I had one call me and say, "It's such a great idea. This is so needed." And so this is something that even a funder who might not understand how to fund journalism exactly through their foundation, they get this and the direct connection it has to whatever they're trying to achieve in terms of their mission, because the information they care about needs to get out there. And how do you do that if you don't have people to do it? So this is something that's really understandable. But yes, largely grants. Yeah.
I want to make sure I get to some of the questions that people are putting in the chat, and this is an interesting one, more probably for you to comment on. So someone asked about a city council she covers in West Virginia just passed a rule enacting a credentialing process for journalists. And they actually require journalists to go and pass their legislature's credentialing process before they can get a city council press pass. And it was done because city council members were upset with a citizen journalist, and a point that was explicitly made by the bill's sponsor. I hadn't heard of that at a city council level before. I don't know if you have. Have you run into any kind of obstacles like that? And what do you think about how that can be challenged?
I just really speak to this. I'm sorry. Is that a citizen journalist not affiliated with any organization? That's difficult for all us. citizen journalists, right? And I think a major challenge in these citizen journalism projects is having a core set of values, a core set of standards and ethics that everybody agrees, you know. Our project was with the League of Women Voters, and so there's good and bad with that. There's a code of ethics if you're a member of the League of Women Voters, and we ask people to abide by those even if they're not a member, kind of sign off on those as our process. But that is the trust thing, right? And obviously they didn't have trust, right? And one person kind of messed it up, and so now they're making it very difficult in that instance. But this is a core part of what I've learned from many citizen journalism projects over the years is that you need to have these agreed ethics, values, and standards. And it is very hard to do that without some other organizational structure or institute that is hosting it, right? And that will kind of set a standard.
It seems to me if it's a public meeting, it's a public meeting and they can't say who can or can't be there, right? And so they can't say that just because we don't consider you a credentialed journalist, you can't be here, and no one can say that you can't take notes in a public meeting. And if it's in a public place, now where they get you, I think, is the video and the photo, because there's some places where you need permission ahead of time, and like in New Hampshire, that's been upheld, I think. But being in a public meeting and writing it down or asking questions, not during the meeting, but like that should totally be allowed. I don't think that's
you would think, you know, expert. But what we taught our volunteers is there's actually 3 laws you're dealing with every time you go to a public meeting. Like we have our sunshine laws here in Colorado that says you should do this, things should be in the open, right? But your right to record the meeting is actually your First Amendment right. Has nothing to do with the open media laws, and those are left to discretion of these smaller boards, right? And then the third thing is Cora. So when they go into executive section and they don't tell you what's going on, later you can request records. But it's those 3 things put together that kind of comes into conflict at these public meetings that people need to understand, because there's no absolute right, really. And a lot of these freedom of information laws, state by state, there's a lot they don't say, as Jeff will tell you.
Yeah, Max, have you run into, as documenters, run into push back against, you know, your you know, citizen journalists or whatever, you know, I don't know if they're called that necessarily, but documenters, because they feel like they're destructive or whatever, they just don't want them there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we train documenters very specifically not to participate in public comment. They can, you know, at other meetings, you know, participate and, you know, have that full right to be, you know, giving public comment. But when they're on assignment as a documenter, they are not supposed to participate other than taking notes. What we've seen more often is boards and committees that are not expecting anyone from the public to be there, and either preventing access by closing down a Zoom room, for example, or turning a documenter away, saying, "Hey, this is a private committee. We aren't expecting, or you aren't allowed to come inside." We give every documenter an ID badge that says, "Hey, I'm documenting this in the public interest. I'm partnered up with Resolve Philly, or I'm working with Signal Cleveland to be doing this work." And we see part of our work as educating those local committees as well, so that they're expecting to do their work in the public. In Fresno right now, our colleagues at Fresno Land are suing the city council because their budget subcommittee, of the 10 biggest cities in California, only Fresno has a budget subcommittee that has been considered an ad hoc committee. They've been meeting regularly for 4 years, but they said, "Oh no, this is an ad hoc committee. We don't need to abide by the state's Brown Act, the Open Meetings Law for California." So they're suing them right now. This part of our work is making sure that if something seems off in one of our cities, that lessons from other parts of the network can be coming through. So the Fresno Land team, has been used to going to these meetings for years, but because they're participating in the network, they're able to learn from what Cleveland is doing and seeing what Detroit's doing, and that power of the wider network to be able to reinforce that learning, to be able to gut check, is this something that is just weird or specific to my city, or is this potentially an Open Meetings Act violation? That allows for a stronger network, for more transparency in local government, and for the ability for us as the network to be able to advocate for more transparency across the board.
Yeah, and all this goes through. Oh, sorry.
The revolution is in documenters, Max, because there's never been a public movement that has been big enough where you could join up, right, like that, and advocate for those things. So.
Yeah, and Rachel on the in the chat is asking about this very thing about what do you do when somebody actually closes the door on you or gets physically aggressive or tells you you can't record. And what I would say is, establish a good relationship with your state freedom of information group, like Colorado's and New England's, because we're the ones who help you fight for that access. And if you run into those issues, we need to know about it. We've just recently had our legislature is, all the floor action is recorded and live streamed and all that stuff. Same thing with the committee hearings, but we just had a lawsuit about open meetings violations because they're actually keeping some meetings off calendars on purpose, and they're communicating by disappearing messaging apps. So there's all sorts of ways to violate the open meetings law in every state, and a big piece of what documenting meetings for anyone is about is knowing something about your sunshine laws. And if you don't know, our groups are good resources for that.
I would also say don't underestimate relationships with local governments. So like in the county commissioners, their secretary, we became besties, right? So they're not trying to undo you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes they just do not know if they're doing it wrong or the process they should go through. And so instead of a gotcha moment, have a come to Jesus moment, right? Like, what are your problems? That kind of thing. That dialogue between the journalist and the local government can be very productive, because ultimately most of these people want to serve the public interest. They want to give you information. They're not in government because it pays well.
Well, and some of them, I'm sure, are probably their reaction, or maybe a lot of them, will be, hey, somebody's paying attention to what we're doing. This is great. Nobody ever came to our meetings before, but we're doing important things that people ought to know about. So a question in the chat, what are some of the perils and promises of using AI, which is something I also thought to ask you all. We all know that you can use it to take notes. Where do you see all that going?
Yeah, so at the network level, we see opportunities to provide coaching to documenters. Having an opportunity to look through somebody's writing, for example, take a first pass and say, hey, do my notes make sense grammatically? Is there, any additional meetings or sets of notes in the collection that this might be compared to that would provide some more context? We don't think that having large language models assess local government meetings without local context and experience is the way to go in the long term. We're doing this work not just to provide coverage, but it's to make sure that people understand local government, have an opportunity to engage with local government, and feel a sense of connection and trust with local media where they're at. And while one of the big challenges that we've seen, and I think I spoke to this a little bit earlier, there are so many public meetings that are not made available. There was a good conversation in the Hoover platform about accessibility for public meetings, and we had this wonderful couple of years there where public meetings were streamed, were made over Zoom, and we've seen that slowly starting to get pulled back in many of our states and sites. And we want to make sure that we're working to make local government more accessible, more transparent, and more participatory, and relying on artificial intelligence to be able to do that. Should really only be done in support of community learning, and that's kind of where we draw the line.
I took a different approach to this. We were doing a small project. It was just me kind of managing and running things. And so I leverage as much AI as possible. Like I mentioned, you can, if you have a Zoom link to these committees, I can send various AI programs and robots to record the meeting for me, to take a transcript, sometimes take video, oftentimes take screenshots, which are very helpful for processing. The way I leveraged it in our project was two ways. One, supporting better notes from the documenters, right? Or from the observers. And so they saw what they did, but then I made a transcript and I made summaries with timestamp links to go to the video, so then they could check their work and go back and find relevant quotes. Because what we found in publishing our reports is what journalists wanted was more quotes. They wanted to know what people were saying, right? And so using transcripts and the AI summaries helped us really go back, find those relevant quotes pretty quickly, right? And then give a video link where that organization, that news organization, you could take audio from that. You can take video from that. That is straight up a quote, right? So it helped in supporting the observers, but also I could send one of my AI guys to record that meeting for me, and then I can assign it to an observer later who could not make that meeting. Because giving options for people to report after your kids go to bed at 9 p.m. and still be engaged is super important. And so AI isn't taking out anything. It is leveraging all the human smarts, let's say, right? And I'm leveraging it to support people to take better notes, find things more easily, and also have people trust them. Because us starting up a project with no legacy, we didn't have a lot of credibility. So I needed all those AI tools, the video, the transcripts, so that people can trust us. So I would just, don't be afraid of AI. It's not taking the people out of things. It is letting people do the smart things and taking all the busy work out of it.
You need the human to put things in context and to ask the right questions about it, and to use their judgment about what's important. In the couple minutes we have left, I'm wondering from each of you, where do you see all of this in, say, 3 years? Where is it going, and what would you like to see?
I will say I would love to see it, first of all, everywhere, but particularly in New Hampshire. I mean, my goal within the next 3 to 5 years would be to have documenters in each region of our state, servicing each of the sets of outlets that are in each region of our state. I think that would be amazing, and I think it's doable and possible, because I think once there's one success somewhere, all the other outlets are going to see it. That'll help them trust even more once they've seen it in action, and then they'll all want to participate. I'm looking forward to that.
Max?
This is not within the next 3 years, but long-term goals, we want to see documenters become a part of the fabric of how people think about local democracy and local news and local information. There are many communities right now without a dedicated local news outlet. No public radio, no public television, no blogs, right? And there are people in those communities who are doing the hard work of getting that information from these committee meetings to residents who need it most. And we'd love for, we've seen this already where some documentaries have gone on to start their own news outlets, some documentaries have gone on to run for office. And we'd love to think beyond this as a market problem and really look at the systems that would allow this work to maintain its relevance, its usefulness, and its sustainability in the long term. There's a lot of really great work that our colleagues at Free Press are doing to advocate for public funding for local information. And we don't necessarily need to wait for, entire bills to get passed. There are, organizations like libraries and YMCAs, folks who've been around for a long, long time who've been doing this work. And we'd love to, over these next couple of years, be learning as much as we can about what documentaries can look like, in addition to our, wonderful nonprofit news partners, other types of organizations that want to be able to join the network and remix the work for their contexts as well.
What do you think, January? We've got about a minute left.
I can do it, Jeff. Okay, so I want to disentangle the technology model and the community model, right? Because I love government transparency. And so what we do see in this modern age is there's so many meetings that are not on the record. And so what I want to see in the next 3 years is government step it up and have us nonprofits quit having to get the ingest, do the transcripts, do those summaries, right? And so I would like to see, and this is where AI is going to come in, and it's absolutely going to be a tool for democratizing all these meetings, right? I'm going to see meetings being accessible for people with all abilities, and also a public record that is verifiable and searchable outside of whatever reporting you're going to go on.
We're out of time. Thank you all very much. We will be posting some links and other material in the tip sheet section of Whova, and also the website that